Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. Hope you're having a great start to your week. Today, I wanted to talk about birth trauma and your libido or your sex life or sex drive, however you want to describe it, and whatever state things are in at the moment. And you're probably wondering why I'm talking about those things together. And, there's some very obvious reasons because, we need to rule out the physical reasons why we're maybe, not wanting to engage in intimacy. But then, so if you've gone through a traumatic experience, whether it was physically traumatic or emotionally traumatic or a combination of those things, and you're still sort of trying to regroup and put yourself back together in any kind of way, it seems fairly obvious that it would affect your willingness to be intimate. And, when you think about everything that your body is going through, even if you've had an uncomplicated birth, there's still a lot of healing that needs to happen on a physical level. Like, it's still a traumatic experience for the physical body to go through that, even when things go relatively, uncomplicated. So, and yet, as time has gone on, we have been told over and over again that, um, we should just be able to bounce back, regardless of whether, our experience was, almost all entirely positive and everything went well and healed well and everything was relatively, expected, to the other end of the spectrum of it being incredibly traumatic and, damaging in some way, mentally or physically, emotionally, right? So there's everything in between, and yet whether you had one birth or the other or anything in between, the message is always just like, well, as long as the baby's healthy and you'll heal, and it just takes time, and right, like totally dismissing it's a beautiful experience, don't get me wrong, especially if it's an uncomplicated birth. There is such incredible beauty and yeah, like I just there like it's an awe experience, an awe-inspiring experience. However, when we're just even if we're just looking at the physiology of what's happening to a woman's body in order for this to happen, and then how long it takes for it to come back from that, there is some healing that needs to happen, right? So regardless of what your birth experience was, if the underlying message to your overtly or subtly the message was get on with it, like get on with it and stop, don't worry about that. Don't think about that because you now have this healthy baby. And yes, there's some value in that, obviously, because, for the baby to survive, it needs certain things from its caregivers and maybe even entirely from the mother or the birthing person. So, there is, you know, there is something to be said for wanting to, encourage a person to move on. However, it's incredibly invalidating to dismiss their experience. And then within a relationship, it's equally damaging to dismiss what the experience of anyone in that room might have been who witnessed this experience of trauma. So, both people are going through their feelings and they're feeling all of the feelings, and neither of them maybe feel like they have a way of talking about it and a way of expressing it. And, as women, we'll often get together and we'll talk about our birthing experiences, and that can be quite healing. And, there's lots of different ways and traditions that women have had through time to help other women through the healing process. But I feel like society in general, because it's gotten so fast and because it's gotten so expensive and because it's gotten so stressful, and there's so few resources readily available and, just there for women to help them heal after the birth of a child, that, often couples are left to, sort of pick up the pieces of all of that, well, then also dealing with a brand new baby and all of the changes that brings, right? So then you throw in sleep deprivation, and maybe you're not eating properly because your schedule's just sort of whack, or maybe you've had to return to work and you're trying to juggle a fairly newborn baby, right? There's so much that gets heaped on this small little tiny unit. And so even when things go really well through the birthing process, I would say that even if things went really well there's such a lack of resources for new parents on the other end of that getting home with the infant carrier, that there's no time to process that experience, that birthing experience for most people, especially if it's happened in a medical setting, right? So, while it's incredibly stressful for everyone involved, if there's not a way of kind of working through that and talking to the right kind of people at the right time and getting that validation, then it can be something that stays with us, and then can cause more physical challenges, because the body keeps the score, right? So when a body is put under stress or trauma, it has a physiological response of fight, flight, or fear, or fight or freeze rather, sorry. And so that response can often stay stuck in the body, in that it's almost like you turned a light on, and even though you've left the room, the light stays on, and there's nothing been done. Nobody's come along and turned the light off, and eventually that light is going to burn out, right? So, and it might not just burn out. It could just explode, right? So the body keeps the score, and until we have a way of processing that trauma, it could still keep coming up and being triggered in other ways. And much like the trauma itself, the experience itself could have also triggered up deeper other traumas that we've experienced in other ways. And so what I mean by this is, speaking from a personal point of view, both of my birthing experiences were traumatic. One of them was a C-section with a breech baby. The other one was, and also a hard time nursing. It took me a number of months to really get that underhand. And so there was a lot around that. And then with my second, it was a VBAC, but with forceps, and I was frozen in case they had to do a C-section. So lots of stuff came up for me that I didn't even recognize at the time, because again, we're talking 21 and 19 years ago. So as little resources as there are now, there was none then. There was nobody questioned me how I felt emotionally about it. Doctor's visits were just to check how the physical wounds were healing, and even that was limited, given that I've since seen a pelvic floor specialist who's a physiotherapist who is trained in all things pelvic related. I could have used that probably 21 years ago too, or 19 years ago rather. So, like there was nothing. So we went home with very little resources, and it's only through, the fact that I was connected to a really great community through my yoga classes that I was able to get some help, because I got, there was some volunteer organizations that were able to come and help me with what I was going through physically and emotionally. But doctors, they never asked me how I was doing emotionally and how I was processing that trauma. So, but what I found years later, of course, when I did sort of do that exploration and started to heal some of my deeper wounds, and that came up as one of them, was, and it happened actually after I had done that, like the inner child work or the parts integration, like, so all of that work sort of happened organically through the counseling hypnotherapy sessions that I was participating in as a client. And what, really got me so passionate about that modality is that I had already done that, developmental trauma healing, and then other traumas that had happened through. I'd already done that work. So when the birthing trauma thing came up for me, I didn't necessarily have to book an appointment to see someone again, because I was able to do the work in reflection of what was actually being triggered inside of me in those moments. And so I was able to recognize the patterning that has shown up consistently in my life, that I've now been able to process and get some resolution around, or so some healing. I can now recognize the patterns that were showing up for me in that moment, so that there was the sort of the physical trauma that I was experiencing in those moments that I had to heal from. And then there was the emotional trauma of not feeling heard, feeling like I wasn't good enough, feeling like I was doing everything wrong, that it was somehow my fault. And so all of these things are things that have shown up before in other trauma in my life, right? And because those are the feelings that are being triggered for me, and they are related to the experience of that particular trauma, but they also predate that trauma, if that makes sense. So, excuse me, if you're having a hard time sort of working through the feelings around your birthing experience, it could be helpful to do some work with someone who can help guide you around, what's coming up, what's the knot that keeps you kind of having these same sort of reactions to traumas that happen in your life, because we all experience trauma in one way or another. But how we react to trauma and our resilience, and often that comes down to, who did you have to speak to about it, or who could you talk to about it? And if the answer feels like no one, that's what can really make it hard for you to work through these feelings and to find a way to not move on, but put it in perspective, to find ways to manage your feelings around it, to recognize the deeper feelings that were coming up for you, and maybe how those feelings have existed in other relationships and other traumas and other things that have happened to you. Getting to the root of those things can be deeply healing, in that the next time life throws you a curveball, because it will, those feelings that will come up, you'll recognize them maybe sooner. You'll have acceptance for them. You'll maybe be able to just thank them for coming up. You'll be able to maybe just take some time and nurture that part of you that's expressing these feelings again. Because you'll be able to recognize what's really coming up for you. It makes it easier to move through those things, to get out to the other side, right? Because isn't that what we all want? I think we recognize that there's things that happen in our lives that are sometimes out of our control, and sometimes it's overwhelming and it's too much. And that's the definition of trauma, right? It's too much, too fast. It's overwhelming to the nervous system. We can't find our equilibrium. And not having anyone to talk to about it. That's sort of that's the definition of trauma, right? Because it's not just the thing that happened to you. It's who did you have to talk to about it. And so that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. And that's why I felt it was important to talk about this topic, because it does come up in relationships. It can cause you to maybe pull away from your partner, to avoid intimacy. I mean, even beyond the actual healing that needs to take place physically in order for you to engage in some of intimate acts, there's other things that come up for you emotionally and mentally that can have you sort of pushing your partner away, and it can really have an impact on how you feel about yourself, your self-esteem, your self-confidence, how you feel about yourself as a person. And that can really start to create distance. And then if your partner is dealing with their own sort of trauma around it, and then also they can't necessarily understand what you're feeling and going through, because there's no other way to describe that experience to someone who's not been through it. So yeah, so there can be this time where, although you can be deeply connected in your roles as parents, as co-parenting partners, and maybe you're really rocking those other things, and really you've got that down pat, but then there could be this emotional distance, and that's maybe what's keeping you from connecting and being open to the physical intimacy. And so if that's what's kind of coming up for you, maybe there's some fear around the physical, and then there's maybe some fear around the emotional aspects of it. Maybe you're just needing to sort of go into yourself and kind of, maybe you're in protective mode, right? All of that is very valid and completely expected. And so, and so I wanted to talk about it, because I think it's important that we talk about these things, so that other women can know that if they're going through these things, that they're not alone, that it's completely valid for you to feel these things, to feel that you need some time to heal, that you need some nurturing yourself. And then that might come in the form of therapy for you as an individual, and maybe for your spouse as an individual. And then maybe it means coming together as a couple for couples therapy. Whatever you think could help you, but and your community will, reaching out to your community can be helpful as well. So, hopefully you have some people in your life that you can go to with this, but understand that for a lot of people, they might not understand what you've been through. They can't empathize because maybe they've never experienced that before. And it can be, people don't know how to sort of be around discomfort and pain. And so they might just sort of invalidate you with those statements of like, well, you heal and just give it time. And, like you've got a healthy, beautiful baby, just concentrate on that. And, like, yeah, I get it because I've been there. I totally understand. So if you do need someone to talk to that's maybe, obviously who's not going to bring that kind of energy to it, but is also unbiased in a sense that, you know, if your loved ones can't carry the weight of that, it could be because, they're just a little too close to you and to the baby and to your partner. And maybe there was some fear that came up for them. So maybe they can't deal with discomfort, right? Like for whatever reason, they don't have the capacity, and that can happen, and it's unfortunate. But so that's why I offer what I offer to women, and that's why I talk about the different ways that, um, you know, a woman's libido can change, and how trauma, how hormones, how different experiences like just exhaustion and running yourself ragged and burnout and all of those things can affect your libido, and that there's help. And so I hope that if you're going through this experience, that you're not alone, or that you know that you're not alone, because you're not. And that if you feel alone, that you'll reach out either to me or to someone else that you trust, that can hold space for you. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Namaste.